Stand by.
All ahead flank. All ahead flank.
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Hi, everyone. I'm Uri Geller, and guess what? You're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
That is absolutely correct. You heard it from several folks. We welcome you back to the one and only, truly, very, very, very truly international show that brings you truth that you never want to know. Now, I always say two major things. One, disclosure is in your hands. And two, knowledge is power. I don't want everybody out there to gain knowledge and gain power and get a one-up on the rest of the world. Everybody can be knowledgeable and powerful and loving and caring, and we can make the civilization, which is a tiny blip of time, if you believe the 13.5 billion years of this universe. Not talking about multiverses, this universe, and of course the life of Earth. Just as Foster Gamble will say again when he joins us in about a month or so, maybe less, maybe in a couple weeks. He's already committed it's up to him right now to give me 3 dates. That way I can fit him in on a day that is open, because we got some awesome surprises for you. Now, I am very proud that up until tonight we've had 46 countries interacting with this show. That is, of course, Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live, broadcasting from the City of Angels, where it is officially 7:11 p.m. I like that. I really do. 7:11 p.m. For those of you in the East Coast of the U.S., 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. And where my grateful and awesome co-host, who's my brother from another mother, very cool guy, does a lot behind the scenes. I hope you guys, really guys and gals, appreciate how much goes into what we do to give this information to you. It's taken almost 7 years since the show has began, and it's morphed to accommodate you. We want to provide you information that you're not going to hear from anywhere else, and we want it to come from the horse's mouth. Yes, secondhand information is better than no information, but when you can get first-hand information and take it one step further, when you can speak to that horse, then I think that just is joy, and that gives me hope of why we all volunteer to do this international show. And that's where I was going with this international. My grateful, cool co-host, live in his studio in London, England, 3:12 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. That is the one and only Johnny Webb. Johnny, brother, how you doing tonight?
Yeah, pretty good, Dr. J. 0313 here. So, yeah.
You're cold. Jeez, wow. So you're saying you're saying negative 13 degrees Celsius right now.
Well, no, it's pretty chilly here, but for sure. No, but just as you were speaking, the time, mine switched over to...
the time. I see what you're saying. Got you. Well, speaking of chilly, here old in sunny California, it happens to be on the chill side. Now, California, again, we've had people from Colombia, Argentina, South Korea, Ukraine even. I mean, heck, isn't part of that still in a war zone? This was straight from Kiev. That's a huge city. And not to mention where Vladimir Putin resides, Moscow, Russia. I would love to come visit that time, but more importantly, we are still working on getting Mr. Edward Snowden on the show. We have a good edge. Now, he's got teams of lawyers that have already worked for him pro bono. Pro bono is a Latin phrase that means for good. In law, when you take a case pro bono, you're doing it for free. And you're actually, the California State Bar Association requires you to do a certain number of pro bono hours per year. But when you're dealing with something that has never ever been done in history before, somebody telling the world some of the nation's top secrets that affect everybody, every single person, that how many people are being monitored through their cell phones or any smartphone, tablets, and laptops and computers, even those little cable boxes and conversion boxes. One of my old co-hosts, who was on the show for a short time until I helped him get on one on his own, which was different topics, but he's a great guy. He retired from radio a few years ago. He had purchased 2 of those digital boxes. Well, I think he probably purchased more. I doubt he only had 1 television in his house, especially with, I think he had four girls between the ages of 2 and 12. So that's pretty hefty, a handful. But nonetheless, when the United States of America made that change that took off analog television and made it digital, giving you access to more channels for free, he got an extra box, and he made this YouTube video, and he compared the two. So you see it coming out of the brown packaging, sealed straight from the government, because the U.S. government actually subsidized it in the very beginning. So far, so much so that in the very beginning, it was 100% free. And when my mother, who doesn't really watch cable and didn't really care to have cable in her bedroom, sure, she watches it in her living room, she just got that digital box, but got it when it was way late, to the point where she couldn't even use her analog unless she was going to use a DVD or Blu-ray or something like that, or laptops or PCs or Macs, which she doesn't know. So he purchased another one of these conversion boxes, opens it, and what does he find? A camera and a microphone. So if you see a little piece of equipment that was given to you for free by the government, then was eventually sold for $30, and I'm sure it goes down even less than that now. Maybe they might be still giving them away for free. What do you get when you get premium cable? And don't forget what David Petraeus told us. This was quite some time ago, actually. This was not too long after the iPhone hit the streets of the world, right after the collapse of the world economy, which, as my good co-host Johnny Webb brought to me, a very critical movie that I've seen enough times to... He knows how I watch movies. I get the best scenes until I memorize every aspect of them, because they're all a lesson. And it was The Big Short. And it meant short is when you short it in the business world. It's in stocks and bonds and stuff like that. What you're doing is you're betting against. So essentially, the name, if you can sort of subtitle it or change it up to be more known rather than having to figure it out or understanding once you watch the movie, is it's the big gamble against. and it doesn't tell you what, but it turns out you are gambling on the economy of the United States, thus affecting the economy of the globe. Remember, brothers and sisters, we are all brothers and sisters. Scientifically, even skeptics cannot attest to that, saying it's false. They say it's proof positive. They all believed that 6 degrees of separation, that I am related to someone who's related to another person who's probably related to a king or queen, who's related to some other princess, who's related to another king, and related to you, my brothers and sisters. We are all in this together, in this fight. Not fight. We need to stop this primitive warfare of each other. We need to move on for that. We need to become a culture where every one of us is not just surviving, but thriving. End this violence of jealousy and greed or envy, because if everybody has what they need, if all their needs are catered for, if you're short for food or cars or whatever, if everybody had what they wanted, then you could really move on to improving your life and starting to open your eyes and become aware. Get out of that sleep, eat, work, sleep, eat, work, sleep, eat, work zone and become more aware. Take a walk through nature and look at the leaves of a tree all the way down to the detail, and then you'll understand that there is so much more than what you have been programmed, as our good friend and guest from Thursday told us, Michael Aquino, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Michael Aquino, PhD, a former modern-day Satanist. The reason I say that is because modern-day Satanism is a lot closer to atheism than anything at all. It's not what they did 500 or 1,000 years ago or whatever it was, where it was straight up devil worship. They basically pulled a circus act, and they even admit that. They named Church of Satan because it was the most obscene, offensive name you could find to Christianity, or for that, I'd say every religion. So there's a big difference, very big difference. Everybody keep that in mind. You're not eating children or doing stuff like that. You're basically being aware and recognizing that right now is the time for you to do something. And I'm not talking about, don't live your life making plans of what you're going to do and that's it. No. Every minute of every second you're alive, remember, you are alive. Be grateful. Be thankful. You know, if you are praying to God or Allah or whatever you are, be grateful that you have this moment and make the most of it. No one promised us tomorrow. Knock on wood, which, by the way, that goes back to knocking on Jesus' cross when he was on it, sadly. I try to picture being at that crucifixion. That would be just so horrific. I don't think I can handle seeing a man or anything, a woman or anybody, a woman stoned, or a man that is taken to a cross and hung there by nails through his hands and feet. I could not watch that and see that happening where he dies a slow, painful death. I mean, part of me always wants to wonder, and I did do a lot of research. I like psychology. I read about it every day on this side. That's just my personal thing. I've always been interested in ancient civilization, sociology, and psychology. why do we do what we do, what causes us to do what we do, and why do some people do things that the rest of us consider bad. I really, if you lived by all 10 commandments, then I think every single law that stemmed from those commandments would essentially end everything. You would have no crime. You would have no murders. Because I always wonder, do those people who can commit murder after murder after murder, and a rape and a murder and maybe a kiddie rape, molestation, which really saddens me, and another murder, and go to trial, have no remorse, get sentenced to death row, and not be in it for the fame or anything, but just not care? Are they missing part of their brain? That's the part that I don't get. Or are their hearts full of ice? I mean, where's the warmness? I've never understood that. Johnny, what do you think about that? Do you think people are missing something that causes them to not feel sympathy or empathy for somebody suffering?
Well, when I think of it, I think of, soulless in the sense, but some people aren't soulless. I think they're just dark.
Yes.
And so you need people of light to go into that darkness and pull them out of it, to shine a light on the dark. It's hard, isn't it? Because, as you say, there's evil on the earth, and we get the most, destructive and violent and, what's the word? Just terrible deaths of things.
Yes.
Of people, through mutilation of people among each other and cultures and, tribes or whatever. But the point is I think that at that point they're in a dark area. They're not with the Lord.
But do you think it's that point? But what about those people
at that point? And being on their own, they're just susceptible to
Johnny,
dark.
What about those people who are living that way through their entire lives? That's the part that I don't understand. I understand if you did something bad, you go to prison, and then you've come to terms with it, you regret it. You want to meet the victim's family and apologize and rehabilitate yourself. I understand that. I'm talking about the people that I don't want to violate FCC, since we are an international show, broadcast on several different forums. But those people that really feel sorry for what they've done and say, I was stupid, I was foolish, I was young, but those are different than those people who experience this throughout their entire life. I mean, that's the group I'm focusing on. Why do you think they do what they do? Do you think they're missing part of their brain, or are they soulless like you were talking about? Or, I mean, what is wrong with them? That's what gets to me. And well, I guess
as I say, if you've got no faith, if you just think that you are, on your own, and you're just an accident that arrived out of a big bang, then you're not looking or searching,
which is what mainstream science teaches you in school. That's actually
absolutely. It takes you away. It takes you out. Look out here into the big world. Universe deep and far. And it doesn't teach you to look inward. You see.
And thank you for saying it that way,
it's like
because
inner space, isn't it? Like the movie, it says go inward.
Yes.
In a sense, it's an inward thing, isn't it?
I'm actually really grateful, Johnny, that you mentioned the word accident, because that is exactly the way we're described. We are described, especially, Johnny and I are not millennials. His children are, and when I get children, if I have children, then they will be millennial or even past millennials at that point. Right now, I'm very happy that I was blessed to have been asked to baptize a beautiful 8-month-old girl who I watched from the moment she was born. I first met her when she was 3 days old, or I think on the second day, almost turning into the third day. And I've been watching her, and 8th month was just this past Sunday, and she's gonna have her first Christmas in 5 days. Yeah, literally 5 days. And just to see that innocence in her, and to see the way she looks at you, and I'm always wondering, how peaceful is this child? And I know when you were here, it bugged you when I was watching some of these movies, like, for instance, Steve Jobs. And because I'm one of those people that when I find something interesting to the point where there's a lot to get from it, I will watch it over and over and over since because I like it. It takes time away and you're learning something. But I've been watching Jack Reacher for recently because they've had part 2 out. It's not the best version yet, but it still is, yet to hit, of course, say on demand to purchase or Blu-ray. It's not quite there, but it's getting close. I don't know what it's called. Just find out the other Jack Reacher. But the first Jack Reacher, essentially, I'm not going to spoil the movie at all for you. I'm just going to give you one major point. He's a military man, and prior to doing what he does in the movie, he had come back to the United States and had been there for 2 years and had been a drifter. And they said he had no credit card, no car, no address, former, current. Basically, his life was he was born on a base abroad from a father in the military. And, of course, I don't know, a mother in the French Corps. And went from base to base to base. And then enlisted into the Army. And this first trip to the United States, even though he had a United States passport because he was on another base in another part of this world, which is considered sovereign land, then his first time he entered the U.S. was to attend West Point, which for those of you who don't know, living in those other countries that I appreciate you listening to, is what the top school for Army cadets. If you go to West Point, that's what a lot of generals have on their resume. Generals, even some politicians. I mean, look at Dwight D. Eisenhower. The point is he goes to West Point, then he ships out for good. It says Iraq, Iran, the Balkans, you name it. Then it says, and for only the second time in his entire life, he comes out back to the United States after literally a lifetime of being in the military and simply disappears. And the one person, this is the very beginning of the film, the other person says, well, is he dead? He says, not according to a Social Security and a bank account where he gets money, where he's withdrawing money through wire transfers at different locations, which they can't access without a federal warrant. So he is working on a case, and I don't want to get into other detail or anything that would spoil the movie for you, but he's working on a legal case. And at one point, he grabs the woman's arm that he's working with and says, humor me and come here and look out this window of this office building. And he asks her, what do you see? She said, the same thing I see every day. People working. I'm working in the office across. It's a multi-story building with glass windows and people doing different things. They could be accountants, lawyers, or real estate agents. The point is they're all white-collar jobs. All the men are wearing some sort of white shirt and tie, and all the women are dressed to that kind of work, secretaries and so, or lawyers. The point is, he says, imagine you've seen this for the first time. Then he goes a little personal, and he says, imagine that you've spent your whole life dedicating it so you can help protect the freedom of this country. So you've done that your entire life, And then you decide, hey, well, I've done this long enough. How about I go home for the first time in my life, other than going to school and shipping out, which was not really seeing the United States other than West Point, and says to himself, I want, how about checking out that freedom that I fought so hard to protect and to serve for? And then he says, look at all those people. How many of them are truly free? Free from debt, free from depression, free from stress, free from anxiety, free from disease. He says, imagine that. How many of them would do the same thing right now, knowing what they've learned throughout their life? And essentially, it goes back to the first thing I said. How many of them are truly free? And that's why I'm glad Johnny said, everybody, please look inward as we approach this Christmas season, which I have to acknowledge, that most of the world is not Christians. You have your own religion. So happy Hanukkah for those people in the Judeo-Christian community, along with Merry Christmas. And I don't know what else to say for the other countries, except for the fact that it is the winter solstice. But go look inwardly, everybody. Please do it, because it will wake you up. Make contact with your inner self and your higher self, and then spread that love. Because when you love somebody and you do something not for a benefit of yourself, if you're selfless, you're going to have this feeling of, it's just, you can't explain it. If you can help somebody, if you see a stranger with their car broken and they're struggling to push it by themselves and you pull over to help them, it just gives you a good feeling when you help somebody. Because what happens when you get the help? And so just take it another step further and love each other. Now, I'm not trying to give you a sermon, which it probably sounds like one. The reason is of course, I always bide for 5 to 10 minutes from the beginning of the show for you guys to go to drjradiolive.com, DRJ Radio Live, or any social media site like Minds, MINDS.com, which of course my dear co-host Johnny Webb set up. That's the newest one. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, especially YouTube, drjradiolive.com, Flickr, Tumblr, Pinterest, Slack, Snapchat, everything. It's all under the same name. You'll see the guest. The guest was supposed to be Mr. Robert Vanderbroek. Unfortunately, I think he might have got the days wrong, so he is not here. But guess what? We here at Dr. J Radio Live are never unprepared. We are ready to ask a question on the spot. And that's why I sort of fell into this and realized, oh, cool, this is, something that fits me in that sense. But the point is that we're always prepared. So we have something for you that none of you have heard this way yet. Now, thanks to Johnny, who has done a lot of work, like I said, in behind the scenes. He does a lot of amazing editing, amazing work. I want to thank you again, Johnny. I truly appreciate it. He spends time taking it away from his day to do this. And he also, when two networks came to us, on top of the two American networks that were asking me, which were Late Night in the Midlands and PSN Radio, both in the eastern coast of the United States, had asked if they could take the Dr. J Radio Live shows. I said, sure. And two from the United Kingdom, thanks to Johnny Webb, also approached us. Deprogrammed was the first one, and most recently Pulse Talk Radio Network. Right? My goal is to give the information to everybody. Let you decide what you want to do with it. Let you decide if you believe it. All we want to do is present it to you. Sure, occasionally we have a suggestion or commenting on something which is subjective, but I try to be as an objective host as possible. And of course, I treat my guests with respect. So if you think it's called kiss-assing, I'm not kiss-assing. I'm just telling them that this is their time and they can do what they want because the next day will be someone else, assuming we have another day. So tonight was supposed to be part 2 of a 3-part series of Mr. Robert Vandenbroek. Unfortunately, he hasn't joined us. He wasn't able to, so you're going to hear an interview that we had to record because we couldn't get him on air. Speaking of which, we are still sitting on a few interviews. I have some unaired interviews of the one and only Dr. Edgar Mitchell. That's right. 6th man on the moon and truly an extraordinary man, and sadly left us early. He did live a good, I think it was 83, I could probably look it up, 83 years or so, maybe a little longer. I wish he stayed longer, like John Glenn, 95, or our good friend Paul Hellyer, who he wrote to me recently, and we chatted on the phone. Turns out he's doing great. He swims every day, and he's 94. 94. That I really wish people can live on forever and ever because we all gain more wisdom. But we never released the Ron Gardner interview, which was essentially his deathbed confession. So we still have that. So we're always going to be prepared to give you guys something new. And don't forget, when it's times like this right now where it's just me and Johnny telling you how much we appreciate you, the listener, and why we do the shows and what the goal of it is feel free to join us. You always can. You know how. Go to drjradiolive.com. Click, of course, on the listen button to listen. Then it'll give you a phone number and a Skype name. I suggest going through the phone number, which is by far the easiest, because using the Skype name is not technically the Skype. It's not connected to this. You would have to go to Skype, and I make it to it forwards to the phone number. So I can't really tell who's actually Skyping, but I don't know how it appears. That's a whole nother point. So I'm going to give it over to my co-host to talk about our guest, the one and only Miguel Mendoza. Johnny, tell us about him.
Well, Miguel Mendoza's an English guy, and he's been going around the world, in fact.
Yeah, so that's you answered the question that I was asking when I was writing you. Everybody, I have the ability to communicate with Johnny through mind. We're telepathic. No, I'm just kidding. No, literally, we are able to have some sort of communication that you guys don't get to hear. But I was trying to ask him the question, which country? So he answered it. Go on. He's an Englishman.
Yeah, so he has the ability to have a sort of sixth sense in a way, and he feels that he's possibly an alien. You know, now in aliens, there's terms like walk-ins.
Yep.
Could be other spirits.
And describe walk-in, which is exactly a walk-in is an extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional spirit that walks into the body, which, according to Bob Lazar, the extraterrestrials just call us a vessel. That's all we are. The bodies we live in are a vessel for the soul, which lives on for eternity. So once we die off, Sure, it's tragic because your family doesn't see you anymore or friends, but that doesn't mean you're gone. You just go to another vessel. At least that's what I hope to think. Is heaven another vessel? I don't know how it works, but the point is a walk-in is the moment you physically die, your body dies, and your soul moves on. This extraterrestrial soul walks in. That's why they call it a walk-in. So I just wanted to describe it, Johnny, because that is what I was taught by people over the decades about this topic.
Well, more than so, Dr. J, what he talks about and what you'll hear this evening is how he's connected to other dimensional aliens that he believes in his sixth sense he's able to communicate and has a good rapport with these beings. And he says they live among us and they've lived among us for a long time. And he'll go into some detail about how he feels and how he interacts with those beings.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a very crucial part. And that's why I'm so thankful that Grant Cameron, okay, it's great. I really got to commend him because he took a different angle. And you're going to hear this on the archives very soon. There's just one little live snippet that's got to be removed, and then it's just a little mistake. A step over, should I say, and then you guys will hear it. It's actually two parts. The second part is what he's currently doing after something woke him up, and I'll get to that. Now, people like Stanton Friedman, they want to know about proof. Look, something is flying that does not come from here. Something is flying that carries some creatures that are intelligent, usually more intelligent than Homo sapiens, and can think from 10 to 100 times faster or even more, and in multiple dimensions, and have powers such as telepathy and, of course, the ability to move stuff, telekinesis, shapeshift, for lack of a better word. Literally, you can make a body, or you could give someone a screen memory, a memory of something that never happened, but you could implant that. And so Stan Friedman contends, look, there's something flying around, and we analyzed photos and stuff like that. Well, Grant Cameron did the great work of going through the presidents, starting from Roosevelt all the way to Barack Obama, and dissecting each and every single one. And he gives the best advice. If anybody out there is able to talk to a top politician or intelligence agent, don't ever say, have you ever, do aliens exist, or do we have any aliens? They're not going to say that. Ask this question. Have you ever been briefed on aliens, extraterrestrials? Now, if they say something to the effect of they can neither confirm or deny that, or something like that, or what Dick Cheney said to him when he was vice president of the United States under George Herbert or George Walker Bush. He said, if I had been briefed on that topic of extraterrestrials, it would have been classified and I wouldn't be talking about it. Wow. Why? What about a simple no? If he just said no, well then he wasn't briefed. But to say that if I had been briefed, it would have been classified and I wouldn't be talking about it, that is sort of implying that it possibly happens. So that's what the first part was, getting to the nuts and bolts. Do aliens exist? Are we being visited? Is there life out there that has more advanced technology and is able to do things with physics that we are yet able to understand and comprehend, let alone produce? And prove that they have been visiting and are taking people and minerals and just so much stuff. But the second part of the show is what he does now, which I think is the most important thing, which is why I'm saying this all because of our guest, Miguel. If you want to know what an extraterrestrial is doing, or what they look like, or how they act between each other, or how they speak to another human, what does the inside of a ship look like? What does one of their cities look like? I mean, these are the questions that I always would love to know. You know, it would be really cool to be walking around the corner of something and just seeing a landed craft with, you know, a variety of beings, and they telepathically invite me in and don't harm me and just take me traveling to their hometowns, different, I would think different planets, unless they all originate from that one, and show me some other things in these instantaneous interdimensional craft, and then bring me back. Those are the things I would like to know. So, who would you ask those questions to? Who would be the most likely candidate to give you the answer of what do ETs look like and what do they do? Somebody who's been in contact with them. That is why he switched to focusing on aliens and, as Johnny said earlier, looking inwards. Consciousness. Very important topic. And I'm so glad that this is a topic that people are grasping and talking about the importance of consciousness now. So, our guest, Mr. Mendoza, possibly being an actual alien hybrid and a walk-in, will tell you about how he has been himself one of those that has memories of places that we, the rest of the public, do not know, and has seen technology, has used technology, and probably understands physics in a more universal way than the limited way we on Earth accept them, which clearly not everybody accepts them. I'm not just talking about you, the listeners, and you, the believers, and you, the people who have met them as in the visitors. I'm talking about everybody. The point is I cannot wait for you guys to pay attention. Pay attention to every time you have a chance to speak to someone who has had such an interaction, so you can start to grasp the concept of what these various types. And I believe the last estimate that we have heard was 250 different extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, and I believe that was it. Probably extraterrestrial covers anything that doesn't live here, and extra-dimensional is from, it could be here, just on a different dimension. So that pretty much is all the categories you need. But in 1988, we heard from Dr. Greer's press conference on disclosure, you heard that the U.S. Army and its recovery team had documented 56 different types. Well, estimates now from researchers are saying that it's closer to 250 plus different beings. And you know what? I think it might be way more than that. And he's only talking about, or they are only talking about, intelligent beings that are able to get here and communicate with us and maybe show us something, show us the light, or they may be light beings themselves. So, with that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and since this is a pre-recorded show or pre-recorded interview that we have been saving for you folks to hear, I want to remind you all that knowledge is power, that disclosure is in your hands, nobody else's but yours. And all of you can be thriving instead of just surviving. Get rid of jealousy, envy, and greed, and just love and appreciate everything that you have, especially as we are approaching both the winter solstice, which has already happened in a lot of this world, and in 4 hours and 5 minutes will officially be happening for me. I think it actually happens at a certain time of the day, so I'm probably wrong, but as far as calendar wise, it's already happened to Johnny Webb, who's in the future from me. And or if our guest was able to show up, Robert Broeke, he's in the future of Johnny. Nonetheless, of course, I want to tell everybody Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and every other single holiday there is. Tomorrow, join us here live for Lieutenant Bob Wiegand from the Navy SEALs, who knows a lot about everything. Not to mention, he still speaks with Billy Meyer, who's in his 80s and has a lot of stuff for us to get out there. That is somebody I'm trying to work out for an interview. And remember our network, Coast to Coast PM Radio Network. We have a domain, c2cpm.com. There's a few other domains that redirect there, but that is the main one, and you're going to be able to just hear these shows there as well. And not to mention, you'll get to watch the Sean David Morton shows of Strange Universe, Bob Wiegand's shows, and of course, David Sarita when he is ready. But in the meantime, this is me and Johnny interviewing someone that Johnny found, who I thought was so fascinating. We're going to bring him back. So, everybody, we want you to give us feedback on this. And I want to thank, of course, Johnny for staying up so late and for helping make this show happen. And Johnny, any closing comments, buddy?
Yeah, I just want to say that we're also available here on Minds, M-I-N-D-S.
That's right, yeah.
Hashtag Dr. J Radio Live or hashtag Johnny Webb with one N, two B's.
Exactly, everybody. Johnny Webb is one N, not like everybody would assume. It's not JOHNNY or IE. It's JOHNY. Webb, W-E-B-B. Remember that, because he's unique, and you will be able to find him. And remember, every social media account is under one name and one name only, Dr. J Radio Live. I would like to say I am signing off for the actual live part. And Johnny, anything final, any cool thought you want to throw out there? I got one piece of news, though, I could say.
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about that the ambassador there that got shot.
Oh, yes, very, very sad.
It reminded me of a bit of sort of, there was a bit on a shirt that blew up, and it just reminded me of those packs you get in movies. How
the heck can you provoke Vladimir Putin like that? That is the stupidest thing to do, honestly. That is the stupidest thing to do. Because
I can't quite see the logic of that at the time.
Yeah.
Him being such a young 22-year-old policeman shouting out Allah
Akbar, God is great in Arabic.
I don't know about that. I'm a bit dubious on that still. We certainly saw a picture of a dead guy, covered in blood.
With 8 bullet holes, eight holes in the poor guy.
There was a lot of camera angles, and there was a lot of media there.
And a lot of people that weren't shot, which surprised me too. And he was shot dead.
To see maybe another perspective of that, not to be gory in any disrespect to the gentleman if he is dead, but there isn't any other angle that people see that gentleman that is actually dead. We do see someone fall down and lay still. But like I say, I'm still out on that at the moment, and that's all.
And all the other places in Europe that were sadly hit, Johnny just mentioned that was the Russian ambassador to Turkey, right, in Ankara.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then we also had attacks in Zurich, Switzerland, and in Berlin, Germany. Again, that now the mainstream press is telling us a different story about who the suspect was. But here's something local and new. I thought this was, hey, freedom of speech. In Boca Raton, Florida, next to a nativity scene and a creche and the Jewish what is it, menorah, Johnny? Menorah? That's how you pronounce it, right? The candelabra that they use.
Sorry, I'm not.
What are the Jewish faith is important with them that holds the candles? It's the menorah, right?
The Torah books, you mean?
No, not the books. What do they use to show that it's Hanukkah? The menorah, right? The menorah.
Like a candelabra.
Yeah, the candelabra. That's what I'm saying. It's called the menorah, isn't it? Or am I off on that? Whatever. The point is,
I'm not Jewish, so
next to that, a middle school. Mind you, he was a teacher of, I believe, 11-year-olds. He put a Baphomet, which is an inverted pentagram with the goat, head there, and he said, "All children hail Satan." And before that he wrote, "Don't be enslaved by religions. Don't be a slave to anything. Free your minds." And then basically, "All children hail Satan." And it was interesting that he got a permit for this, and people vandalized it a few times. And 4 people in 4 separate occasions who either started to destroy it or remove part of it, or 2 people who were spray painting it with graffiti, all got arrested. And because this man, even though he put it next to this nativity scene, shows freedom of speech, freedom of religion. You can do whatever you want. You can celebrate whatever you want, whatever is your choosing. I say, as long as whatever thing makes you a better person and you follow the 10 Commandments, we would be free of everything. I think we would truly be free of everything. We will be one big thing, one big community of love. And 2 comments that I heard I thought were interesting. One came from 2 college gentlemen, the one guy only spoke and said, "I've never been fond of any religion, but this is freedom of religion, and I don't condone it, but I don't not condone it either. This is freedom of speech, freedom of religion." And then a pastor of a Christian church for over 20 years, gray hair and all, maybe longer than that, said, "Hey, this is freedom of religion, and I respect what this guy has done, but I would like to invite him into our church so he can feel the love and warmth of Jesus Christ." I thought that was great because Johnny brought that up to Michael Aquino. So that's the only news I have to say, along with giving my condolences to everybody who is being hurt. And again, everybody, if you're being spied on, just like it's happening, go watch the documentary Citizen 4, go watch Oliver Stone's movie Snowden, and just understand the scale and do a test. Just do a test. Go up there and say, "Bomb, president, dirty bomb, nukes, ISIS, Al-Qaeda," all those keywords. You could Google them, say what keywords triggered off. Don't be surprised if you get a knock on the door within a few hours or next day by some sort of intelligence official or federal police officer or Interpol or Secret Service. Just be prepared for that. But the point is that will show you that you, even though you are innocent, are being monitored. Now, if you're not innocent, if you are participating in some sort of crime, then you're under genuine surveillance. If you're a crime family and you are running a racket and killing people and robbing and hurting and this and that, Well, of course there's going to be wiretaps that are passed on and given by the courts. But you'll realize once you start saying those words that, wait a minute, how do they even know I'm saying these words when I haven't done anything wrong? Why? Because Big Brother is here, my friends. And that's sad to say, because George Orwell's 1984 was even a better society than what we are enslaved to be in. And that's why I enjoyed Michael Aquino talking about Mind War and Mind Star, because I believe we could end physical warfare. It is true. We do have to stop this overpopulation problem. But again, we can all thrive. Thrive, everybody. Remember that. As you hear Foster Gamble and Nassim Harriman, which will both be on within a couple weeks of each other in January of 2017. And not to mention, I will bring Michael Dukakis back. I haven't tapped on him yet because last time I spoke to him, we said we'd do an interview right after the elections, because he just, if you recall his last interview, he said Trump is a lunatic and there is no way in hell that he will ever win. You know, it's a slam dunk for Hillary. And there was conspiracies. I've heard this from non-conspiracy people, such as my own blood. My brother said this to me, that Donald Trump was placed as a candidate to ensure that Hillary Clinton wins. Well, I think even Donald J. Trump is surprised himself when he found out that he won this college, this electoral college, to become the president of the United States, or as I like to say, the CEO of USA Incorporated, because that's pretty much what it's all is essentially. But again, this was prophesized recently in the early 90s by Kurt Cobain, who said, after he was asked about what does he think about politics, he said, if you want anything to change, and now the best way to change is, it's the worst, I don't condone this at all, but the bullets change governments far more than votes. But it doesn't have to be that way. It does not have to be that way, because Kurt Cobain said, if you want to change this political sickness that's going on, this corruption, you're going to need an outsider. More than likely, he's going to have to be a billionaire to afford a campaign to run to become president of the United States. A billionaire who people know, such as Donald Trump. He said this by name over 22 years ago, maybe longer. And so I thought it was just ironic. So everybody remember, January 20th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Donald J. Trump will take the oath for the 45th President of the United States of America. Now, back to the show. Get ready to hear from a true hybrid, as Johnny said. He is, of course, from England, but is a walk-in. And if you want to get his book, go to our drjradiolive.com, DRJ Radio Live. The only name you need to remember, folks, that belongs in every single social media account. And you yourself can then basically, you just, that's all you have to remember. It's all you have to remember to find us and find the archives. So you can get Mr. Mendoza's book by clicking on the Books and Videos tab, scrolling down to Miguel Mendoza, and it will take you to his Amazon authors page, where you can purchase the book that Johnny got for me, which I got 2 of them now, which is cool. Thank you, Miguel. And I suggest you all read it out there. Remember, reading and something is not ever a waste of time. It's exercise for your mind, and it is brain power, folks. Knowledge. So, with that being said, again, now I officially am going to, uh, get ready to get to that point where I will let you, hear Mr. Mendoza and end myself of the, the show. Basically, end my part of the live show. So again, I want to thank Johnny Webb, who stayed awake as always to do such an incredible job. And everybody, we will catch you tomorrow night, and then again Thursday, and again next Tuesday, and on and on and on until the good Lord lets us keep our planet. So, I'm signing off live. Stay tuned for a nice hour of Miguel Mendoza. Here we go, folks.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Mr. Hello, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to... I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the one and only truly syndicated international radio show where we are bringing you the real information. As you know, we are broadcasting Monday through Thursday right here from the city of Angels, where it happens to be 7 p.m. Pacific time. For those of you on the East Coast of the United States, it is 10 p.m. Eastern time. And of course, where Johnny Webb is, it's 3 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, but he's not there today. He happens to be sharing the studio with me today. So that is a great pleasure. And I think that's going to be some fun. And I'm really glad we're able to nail down this interview while he's here. So we hope you all enjoy it. Just remember, shows usually are 1 hour. Sometimes they go up to 2. But in the meantime, we want to bring you some information. And I also want to remind you of some news. You all know that we were already syndicated with 4 independent networks and 27 terrestrial stations broadcasting us, and mostly FM, some in AM. And of course, you have our very own Coast to Coast PM radio network. You also have Angel Espino's PSN radio network and Michael Vara's Late Night in the Midlands network, who the manager is Ira Robinson, and of course set up my good old co-host in the United Kingdom. We have Deprogrammed Radio Network run by JC, and we are also on Shoutcast, iTunes, TuneIn.com, and anything else. And just remember, the name of the show is all you need to know to find anything, because every account is under Dr. J Radio Live. So now, I'm very excited for tonight's show. Why? Because we are going to be speaking to someone who is very controversial. Now, you've all heard Barbara Lamb come on the show, and she's even given us pictures to use of pictures of hybrids. Hybrids meaning people that are part extraterrestrial and part human. And they're walking amongst us, as David Jacobs says. And she let us use several of the photographs when I released her last show as an archive on YouTube. Again, youtube.com/DRJ Radio Live. And so now, today, we get to speak to one of Barbara Lamb's top hybrids, who has written 2 books so far that I see, and of course has much to say about his experience and his life, and being so different than most of you hearing this radio show. And like I said, we've had questions, calls, and comments coming in from 43 countries. We'd like to make that 45 by the end of the year, if not 50. But I'm very glad that 43 countries have had people where you, the listener, are paying attention. Because remember, disclosure is not going to happen by Putin or the President of the United States. No, it's going to happen by you. Disclosure is in your hands. So, with that being said, today, are we really going to be speaking to an actual alien hybrid? Let's talk about that. His name is the one and only Miguel Mendocina, right, Miguel?
It's Miguel Mendonça, but
Mendonça. I apologize about that.
yeah, but I don't personally. I don't identify as a hybrid, although for all of the hybrids that have given an opinion think I am. Let's say that in the process of putting together Meet the Hybrids, I guess I had to look some stuff in the face that had not really, I guess, any framework for in the preceding 40 years of my life. But when I was doing the editing of Meet the Hybrids and basically going over everybody's chapters, 8 chapters over and over again through the kind of editing process, there was, I guess, a point at which I felt like I was seeing so much that was very similar to my childhood, to my outlook, to the way that I'd always related to, I guess, other humans. And I felt like I needed to get some more information to explore it. And I was talking with, there's so many different pieces of this that come together, and I've talked about some of that in the conclusion to We Are the Disclosure, because I felt like, as you said, Dr. J, it's disclosure comes from us.
Exactly.
It's those of us who have experiences, those of us who have access to information, to understandings that we can then, often we need to process that ourselves. We need to try and understand it. What the hell just happened?
Spread the word, right?
Right. And only by coming together can we build up a better picture of this, because, if you just rely on what is out there, even in, let's say declassified documentation and things of that sort, it's still very thin. It's not going to give you the picture of what this really is. So I think the only way that we can get this done is to be honest with ourselves, first of all, about the experiences we're having, and be willing to explore those. And in We Are the Disclosure, I interviewed quite a number of therapists, people who've been working with experiences for many years. And you could see that there is a similar process that people go through. In general, it may be that they go to a therapist for something completely unrelated, and then as they are maybe walking through a regression, and there's a great story in the book that Mary Rodwell tells, where a young guy had, I think, a friend of her son had had a motorbike accident, and he just didn't know what happened. So he knew what Mary did, and so they decided that if he wanted to try and understand what caused this motorbike accident, that he could be regressed by her and go into this. So, it's there in rural Australia. He's out on his motorbike, pretty young guy at this time. As the regression is moving along, he keeps getting to a certain point and then stopping and then kind of coming out of it, and then having to go back through the whole experience and get a little bit further and a little bit further. And finally, he's on his bike and continuing down this dirt track, whatever. And Mary's thinking at this point, well, when is this accident going to happen? Now finally, he stops, and he stops his bike, and he's looking at something in the air. And she says, well, what are you looking at? And he says, it's a spaceship. And she, even doing what she does for a living, she says she never saw this coming. So she's like, okay.
Are you talking about Barbara?
No, this is Mary Rodwell.
Rodwell from Australia. That's right. We just had the pleasure of meeting her recently, and she'll be joining us in the next few weeks.
Yeah, extraordinary woman. And, with a new book due out very soon, as, she'll be discussing. And so basically she allows this young guy to make his way through this experience. And he finds himself up on the craft, and she says, okay, well, what are you seeing now? What's happening? He says, I can see clown shoes. And she says, okay, well, that's unlikely. So she asks him to look again. And he said, oh, they're not clown shoes anymore.
Huh.
And she says, so what are you seeing? And he says, they're feet. And basically,
Giant feet.
well, basically, he then describes, excuse me, a classic gray. And then, he basically, bit by bit, he's describing different bits of this experience. And only later, when he's back on the bike, is he driving along, he's riding his bike, and I guess he hit something, he hit a rock or something. And she said, well, I could only imagine that he may have been still dazed from the experience, and that's why he fell off his bike.
Yeah, and this is what I wanted to actually ask you. Speaking about Barbara Lamb, and I know you were focusing on Mary Rodwell, she is primarily, everything was inspired by Meet the Hybrids, your book, a book that was published in 2015, working with Barbara Lamb, and 8 ET/human hybrids. And I wanted to talk about that for a bit, because it sounds to me that it became clear that we have more information and experience available to us about the ETs than ever before in the history of ufology.
Yeah, when we finished up that project, the book was out. I was then starting to kind of do more networking and just meeting more people and looking at the kind of debates that were going on in the field, and having just come off the back of 8 incredibly intense months meeting these guys and working with them and becoming close friends with quite a number of them. Suddenly it seemed to me like the field was just decades out of date. I thought there is so much information that is available, like this whole kind of discussion about alien agendas and so forth. I thought, man, you can actually pick up the telephone and call one of these hybrids and talk to them and ask them, what is the experience? What is your understanding? How is all of this structured? What is the purpose of it all? I thought this is an absolute gold mine of information. It's completely available. And yet, how is it that this is not getting picked up? I mean, you have David Jacobs doing his work, but he has a strictly, he takes one particular view. He works in a particular way. He has a particular set of experiences. He has a particular impression, and that's what he talks about. But I actually asked both Barbara and Mary, why is it that your conclusions, your experiences are so different to those of David Jacobs? And both of them had, they're actually in Barbara's in part 1, Mary's in part 2, but their answers were actually very similar. Mary said, in terms of the work that he's doing with people, well, you can only take somebody as far as you are yourself. So if you don't have a very, depending on what your approach is and your worldview, perhaps even your expectation,
Your mindset.
it's likely that you're looking at it in a certain way. And that is, the same is true for absolutely any aspect of human life. So it shouldn't be too surprising. But what they're saying is that often people will come to them, and at the beginning of their exploration, they are in the fear place. And why wouldn't they be? I mean, it seems that humanity's greatest fear is the unknown.
That's right.
And this whole subject is nothing but unknown. I mean, particularly when you're experiencing it. It's, Mary talks about screen memories, and those clown's feet was an example of a screen memory. So as soon as she heard something that was that kind of abstract or unusual in that context, she could see, okay, this is probably a screen memory. So if they have that capacity to not only shift our perceptions of them, but block out, okay, it's not perfect. People can be regressed. So their memories cannot be suppressed indefinitely. It still gives us a very nebulous kind of view of this. So if people are looking online and the debate is being dominated by the fear view that David Jacobs' work, seems to embody. And I don't know the guy, we've not discussed, methodology and approach and those things. I mean, maybe an interesting conversation. But if that's all people are seeing, and you'd also have to say that next to that, the overwhelming proportion of movies and TV shows made that involve extraterrestrials, other intelligences, are generally negative. Robbie Graham sent me a copy of his book in the summer, and Silver Screen Saucers. Very interesting piece of work. And he explores this whole subject and the involvement of the military and intelligence agencies since the beginning in crafting the messages in these movies and TV shows. So their hand has been in that, and there is so much fear around it, misinformation, disinformation, an incredible lack of clarity, as you'd be aware. So why wouldn't people be in a place of fear? Now,
well, you're told monsters don't exist, and then you see something that's not human. Of course you're going to have fear.
Right. I mean, why wouldn't you freak out? But what Mary and Barbara say is that often people who go into these experiences will initially have the medical procedures, they will have those checks and whatever goes on, and it may be that David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins stop at that point, that's as far as they go. They say, okay, we've nailed it. You had an experience. You had a terribly fearful experience of medical procedures with these weird beings. However, if you go further than that, when people go deeper into the experience and are asked by Mary or Barbara, people like that, who take that approach, they will begin to open up the other stages, the other layers. And both of them have many stories of people who have gone through an incredible transformation. In fact, the very first client that Barbara ever had, I think this was back in the 80s, maybe early 90s. She's probably told you this story, that she had gone she did 5 years of training in regression. And towards the end of the training, the trainer said, now you may find at some stage in the work that you do that people will come to you and they will report experiences with extraterrestrials, with non-human intelligences. And at this moment, Barbara said she heard this loud voice in her head that said, pay attention to this, Barbara. You will be doing this. So I think it's only like a couple of weeks later or something, but a woman comes up to her in a bookstore, I think where she lives in California, and
Southern California, closer to San Diego, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and said to her, oh, you're Barbara Lamb, you're a therapist. Well, my daughter's been having these experiences with aliens, and she's a nervous wreck, and can you help her? And so Barbara thought, well, with that experience I just had, it seems like, I got the message. I was told you will be doing this. So she said, look, I'm willing to give it a go. So this young lady comes to her, and she is a wreck. She's not in a good place at all. But Barbara, so here's where she differs. people like Barbara and Mary are trained therapists. They are doing this work to help people. That's the whole purpose of what they do. When somebody comes to them, the whole job is, how do I help this person? How do I help them to explore it, to understand it, to integrate it, to heal from it? That's the job. So Barbara worked with this young woman for about, I think she said about half a dozen sessions, something like this. And she said by the end of it, this young lady came to her and she came sailing through the door with such confidence. And she said, I feel privileged to be involved in this. I feel privileged to be connecting with these beings, to be a part of this. So you can see a complete shift in perspective.
And like I said, Barbara is able to have more people that are hybrids living on this planet seem to tend to lean more towards Barbara than they do with David Jacobs or Yvonne Smith or what's Betty Hill's name, Kathleen Martin or Denise Stoner. So she obviously has a knack for that. With that being said, though, Johnny in your town, UK, has a question. Go ahead, Johnny. Johnny in the UK, you ready for your question?
Yeah, well, good afternoon to you. What was it that led you to confirm to you, really, that you were dealing with true hybrids? Because Dr. David Jacobs suggests that these are really unrecognizable among us. Was it just a telepathic way, or is there other ways to confirm they are what they are?
Well, it's an interesting question. At first, right at the beginning of the project, I'd been writing a novel about this whole subject because I was trying to create a framework into which I could place all the different pieces of this phenomenon that I was researching to try to see what the overall narrative may be. I mean, what kind of story explains everything? So I had seen Barbara's hybrids research, her videos. She had a great MUFON lecture, and I was just really inspired by this, and I ended up writing kind of hybrid characters into this novel. And then I finally kind of got brave enough to reach out to Barbara because I wanted her to connect me to some of these hybrids so that I could basically run past them the kind of narrative I created about these hybrids so that I could see, did it actually reflect their lived experience? Did it actually honor that? That's what I wanted to do. And then she told me that she'd just come from a meeting. When we finally got on the phone sometime later, she said, I've just come from a meeting with a group of hybrids, researchers, experiencers, therapists, etc. And we're all thinking about how we can bring this information about the hybrids, etc., to the awareness of, wider society, let's say. And just, it's like a switch was pushed in my brain at that moment that said, okay, Miguel, you need to think about this. You can help. And then I must have been processing it all night. I woke up, I wrote 8 pages of notes in my journal. I turned that into a discussion paper, which I sent to Barbara. We discussed it. And at the end, I said, well, listen, I'm a researcher and writer. You are a therapist. You have the contacts. Together, we can create a respectful project around this, which simply hears these people out. We simply let them say what they want to say, because you know how it goes with documentaries that just absolutely butcher this kind of subject.
Documentaries actually want to edit and make it and spin the field in such a way that it's not the way that the people that are participating actually tells us. Now let me bring up this other topic. Now you could see that there's a spectrum of interest or division of labor that exists in the field in broad strokes. This runs from the masculine, typified by a focus on the technological, political, and physical aspects, to the feminine, typified by a focus on the metaphysical, spiritual, and of course, well-being aspects. Would this also conclude why people talk about the divine feminine?
It's actually a tough thing to talk about, principally because I feel I'm not deeply schooled in it in any way, but it's one of those things that, I've just been, I guess, aware of through my own kind of spiritual interests and my circle of friends and my kind of reading and so forth. But it's one of those things that became really clear to me in this. And you also see on that kind of spectrum, you just see far more guys down the masculine, technological, scientific end of the spectrum, whereas on the other end, the kind of metaphysical, well-being, support kind of spiritual end, you tend to find more women there. I mean, there's plenty of, very spiritual guys that have been transformed through this process. But that was something that was quite clear to me. And it seems to me that the kind of, for want of a better term, the kind of masculine end, the material end of this, it seems like it's been going around in circles for a long, long time. And you still have the same debates about, crashes and sightings and UFO photos from the 1950s. And I just think, well, how can you possibly make progress if you just go round and round in circles? It seems to me that the real progress in this is when you loosen up all of that stuff and you move along that spectrum towards, like, I just think some people, I mean, it's not for everybody, right? I mean, when I talk about division of labor, I mean it. There are people who are better at certain things. That's the way they're set up. Not everything is for everyone. I mean, nothing is for everyone, really.
Sorry, it's
Yeah.
John in LA, but I wanted to ask you, you made a small statement there to say that it's not for everyone, but disclosure actually will be for the whole world. It will be for everyone on this planet, in my sort of like understanding of the way things are being manipulated and changing.
That's if you get that kind of top-down disclosure.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you, because it seems like you have been close to these hybrids in the past and possibly still connected to them, as you say yourself. I was wondering, do you feel, that it's going to be a quiet sort of introduction to this, or it's not going to be this global thing that maybe media makes out, maybe movies make out, that's going to be thousands of UFOs in the sky above London, above LA, above, you're saying it's going to be a sort of gradual, slow, stepping stones type approach that we look round and it's integrated, how do you feel about that?
It's a very interesting question, and it comes up a lot. There are certainly those who feel that there's very different ways of looking at disclosure. The ships in the sky version of disclosure is something that people do talk about, and some, I think, with a slight sense of exasperation, like, God damn it, maybe that's the only thing that will ever get the job done, will be that mass sighting everywhere. But then, some people say...
Well, it's funny you say that, because we were just talking recently about the Phoenix Lights. Eric von Daniken, I'm fortunate to get the only manuscript that is out before it's published for Chariots of the Gods Part 2, 50 years later, his 40th book, but it's Part 2 of the first famous book.
Wow.
And he mentioned in there, and fortunately that's going to be translated to English because I work with publishers and I found one that's doing the job. But he said, when are they going to show up over a giant, football stadium? And then I was talking about the Phoenix Lights the other night and was saying, what about the Phoenix Lights? How that alone right there, you're looking at something a mile wide, like, that could literally fit a lot of Phoenix into it, or the residents of Phoenix in this craft. And it flew across the city and had tens of thousands of witnesses that came forward, not to mention the people that kept their mouths shut and just didn't want to get involved. So, yeah, we may have not gotten this football stadium sort of mass sighting, but we have had it in another sense.
Yeah, and there's been, I think that Phoenix is somewhat anomalous. I mean, we don't hear of mass sightings of that kind on a regular
crazy.
basis.
In 2006, right? And even in 2016, so it's 19 years later and 9 years later, there was another very similar craft that crossed the skies of Arizona. Just as big, multiple camera shots, especially the 2016 version. And the reason why is everyone has a smartphone or some sort of camera in their pocket. So the amount of footage that was captured in this last 2016 huge Phoenix Lights Part 3 sighting that was out there, none of it received any TV coverage, as did the 97 one.
Yeah. And if I can just allude to that, there's also, I noticed in the Daily Mirror back in England that they just published a video of North Carolina. There was a sighting over a hotel, multiple lights, huge craft. And so it's getting into mainstream media. It's certainly coming alive in England. You know, we had Nick Pope recently saying that because of the campaign going on here in America, that they were shutting down certain files that were supposed to be released again from the MOD, and they were sort of postponing that. And even Nick Pope seemed to be upset about that. What's clear to me then is that, you know, there are crafts, there are multiple sightings, they are still prevalent, they're going on, and they're getting reported. And it seems that slowly media is catching up, not so much here in America, but certainly back in Europe. There is a sort of slight disclosure going on in a sense. They don't give every country the same freedom of information at the same time. It's a bit like a DVD when it comes out. Different regions have different codes, you know, of times to release, and it feels like so information is getting out there. But relevance to going back to what you're, you know, discussing here this evening of your book regarding these hybrids, hybrids. For me, as a listener coming in, I would suggest that it's quite frightening because on one hand we have people that study this with hypnotic regression, and for instance Dr. David Jacobs, he clearly mentions that he's worried about the future of hybrids among us. He doesn't feel that it's a positive thing. Like most things are done in the daylight if they're positive. You know, when things are done in the midnight and it's secluded, it almost naturally feels dangerous and not true, you know. And I wondered, like, you know, with the listeners who are thinking that don't know anything about hybrids and understand that they're possibly here among us, how would you reassure these people?
Well, the people I know, you know, my friends that identify as hybrids are hands down, you know, other than a small group of people, the most wonderful people I've ever met. I mean, they are extraordinary. I mean, they are quite different. I will say that. They are, I mean, through the 90s, I met a lot of people who kind of espoused the kind of, you know, spiritual beliefs, but they lived by none of them. Whereas these guys, and those people also had a real arrogance about their spirituality. Whereas these guys, they live it. These are spiritual people who absolutely live by it. Okay, none of them are perfect. They still have their humanity, but there is this other aspect to them with this far greater understanding, I think, of a sort of expanded awareness, an expanded conception of existence, of reality, of how it works. And there's just the joy that comes from these people. I mean, to me, it is overwhelmingly positive. That being said, I think the work that David is doing, I think we're not talking about the same thing. I think we're talking about different hybrid programs. That's my general sense in my ignorance. I mean, who knows? But my sense is that what he's talking about may be quite different. But then again, we don't know if those same people that he's getting this information from went to Barbara and Mary, and they actually explored their experiences in more depth and detail, and derived a more expanded understanding of what's going on, would they see it the same way? Again, it comes back to this issue where we all have our own filters, we all have our own biases, our own mindset. We can't get away from that. We are who we are. And, I think that with something like this, you've got to be willing to say, I don't know. You've actually got to subvert that whole kind of expert culture that we exist in. And you've got to be willing to get out there and say, I don't know. All I have is this information here. And I freely admit that this is my bias. This is simply the way I'm seeing the information, because to me, that's the truth. Everybody creates and lives within their own reality, whether they realize it or not. So when you come to something like this that is so multi-layered, that is so complex, I don't think I would have a lot of faith in anybody who says it's like this. This is how it is. This is how reality is. I mean, okay, you get lots of channels who will say that. They will, well, at least they will say, here is the information as I have it. The hybrids tell me that even the ETs they're connected to will say, we are still learning. We don't have all the answers, because they only have access to their particular realms. Each of us only has access to a certain amount of reality. So to me, the only complete picture that is possible is that which already exists in everybody. And you can never hear that whole, it can never be expressed to you in words, certainly. I think you can only, in Zen, they talk about, boundlessness, boundless awareness, and that sort of thing. In mystical experience, in all kinds of altered states of consciousness, humans have been experiencing boundlessness, an absolute unification with everything that is. And to me, that might be the deepest truth in all of this. And it's not a thing that you can express with language. I've tried describing brief experiences of boundless awareness that I have had, and it is really tough to put into words. And in fact, one of the things that I went after, certainly in the early stages of We Are the Disclosure, is the terminology of this whole subject, trying to, asking people, well, does it make any sense to call this thing ufology, given that only actually deals with one specific kind of area, which is the vehicles. You could say the contact aspects, but there's lots of people who, again, going back to this spectrum, there's lots of people, and the division of labor, there's lots of people who just want to stick with the craft. Like, that's as far as they're willing to go. That's the way they're set up. That's their mindset. That's their skill set. That is what they're good at. That's what they offer. And that's why I took the approach that I did with We Are the Disclosure. I tried to pull together a representative group of people who were giving me, at least as far as I could see, a really good sense of the spread of this subject, the kind of depth and breadth of it. I was quite inspired in the early part of my research by Jim Ma's book, Alien Agenda.
Yes.
And I interviewed him. He's in part 2 of We Are the Disclosure, which was just published like today, I think. And in Alien Agenda, it really kind of scratched that itch for me, that holistic itch, in that I, again, as I say, I wrote a novel to try to create a framework. I want to pull all this stuff together. I want to try to understand what it looks like when you put it together. I wanted answers to this stuff since my dad first put a book on UFOs in my hands at age 5. So
it begs the question if he was involved. But Miguel, if I may cut you off, we're gonna take a short break. You hold that thought, because we have so much more to talk about when we return from this briefly short messages right here on Dr. J Radio Live. Welcome back. Now we are speaking to a possible hybrid, someone who's done so much research and is releasing his third book literally right now, which is We Are the Disclosure Part 2. And I'm sitting here in front of me with the We Are the Disclosure Part 1, 700 years of research on ET human interaction. For all of those of you interested in getting this book, all you have to do is go to drjradiolive.com, click on the books and videos tab at the top, scroll down until you find Miguel's name, and from there, all you have to do is click on the link. It'll bring you to his Amazon authors page or his website, whichever is available. The point being, you can get it directly there without having to go search in another direction. But with that being said, Miguel, if you have any website that you would like to promote, let's talk about it real quick.
Sure. Well, there's wearethedisclosure.com and meetthehybrids.wordpress.com.
Ah, yeah, and that's the title of your other book, Meet the Hybrids, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember when Barbara Lamb was talking about that. Like I said, when she brought photos of hybrids, and she's done a lot of work, as you mentioned. So has Mary Rodwell, and a lot of people that you list here, featuring interviews with Alexis Brooks, Lynn Buchanan, Michael Cremo, great friend of mine, by the way, Klaus Dona, hey, Stanton Friedman, Stanton the man, is always on the show. Robert Fullington, Marilyn Giwak, Reverend Gevicki. Is it Reverend Hernandez, Gary Hazeltine, CB Scott Jones. I don't know how to pronounce this one. Juju. Say that for me, please, Ego.
Oh, that's Jojali.
Yes. Quita, right?
Cuter.
Cuta.
She goes by Juju.
Juju. Okay, so Juju, Kuta, and Barbara Lamb, and of course, Vanessa Lamorte. So, nonetheless, make sure everybody you check out wethehybrids.com, wethehybrids.wordpress.com, as well as wearethedisclosure.com. Now, let's pick it up back right where we left off. Johnny Webb from London has a question. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, hi there again. Just looking here, it says, have the hybrids ever spoken of their other half of their DNA, the alien side? And have they said why they need us humans as a clone and not, say, a dolphin that's out in the ocean away from, say, the public eye?
Well, I guess there's a couple of questions there. I guess when you're getting into it with these guys, there's two aspects that are really, really interesting to me, which is, firstly, well, why do they exist? What is going on here? Why have they been created? What's the story there? And then the other thing that's really fascinating to me is how on earth do they integrate that stuff? And that's like a 5-hour conversation all of its own. I mean, both of those pieces, in terms of why they're created, it's an amazingly complex thing, and I don't pretend to be remotely expert in explaining it because everybody has their own slightly different take on it. Part of it is what is referred to as ascension, which is this business of shifting from, like, we're in the third dimension here. We are in a very dense kind of very physically embodied state. Now, Michael Cremo's chapter in We Are the Disclosure is absolutely fascinating. He describes, he's a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. He has made a long and detailed study of the ancient Sanskrit writings.
That's right.
And so he's very familiar with the Vedic cosmology. And he described reality as existing basically in three realms. The realm of pure consciousness, which is where we all come from, the realm of subtle matter, and the realm of dense matter. And we are here in the realm of dense matter. And there are those who are attempting to transition to a more subtle state. So the kind of state of subtle matter, or down that road far enough, I guess, is pure consciousness. But this is where you're trying to plug in different cosmologies, different understandings of reality from different people. But that's where it gets really interesting, is looking at the overlaps. Alfred Lambremont Weber, interviewed in part 2, he wrote a book called The Omniverse, and the Omniverse he defines as basically everything. It's all of the physical realms and all of the metaphysical realms, all the spiritual realms. And he basically is giving a similar kind of cosmological picture to that of Michael Cremo, it seems to me. I mean, I would love to get those guys in a room and have them hash that out.
I don't know if Alfred Weber's actually, been in close contact with hybrids like yourself, Mary Lamb and others. But if it was just spiritual and meditative contact, why do you think hybrids have been made in the physical sense, as a being here?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that's another really very interesting question. And that comes back to this issue of, well, from Michael's perspective, or from the Vedic perspective, let's say, if we begin in the realm of pure consciousness, he said it may be that when, my sense of what he said was, and other people may interpret it differently, but my sense of it was that when souls in the state of pure consciousness become more, let's say, egocentric, egotistical, they become more kind of self-involved. And it may be that over time, they will basically devolve down to a state of more dense matter in order to work out those kind of, let's say, selfish impulses, because it seems to me it's easier to be selfish in a material plane where there's material stuff you can be selfish about, and plus you have a body, and when you incarnate physically, you are at risk. Let's be fair, it's pretty tough to get these bodies through each day. There's a lot of stuff that we have to do, and there's a lot of stuff we have to not do. And it seems to me that, oh my goodness, I mean, it's just a colossally complex subject around the physical and the metaphysical and the relationships between these. But from the, let's say, the ET perspective, many of them will be in the realm of subtle matter, possibly the realm of pure consciousness, depending, I guess. Some of them may be incarnated or able to manifest in the third dimension, perhaps not permanently, but perhaps for a certain period of time. And so it may be that one of the most important things for the ETs is to create physical incarnations that can experience the material. And I mean, Juju talks about basically uploading her experience back to the reptilian beings of which she is a part on her planet. So she's basically going about her day, having her experiences, and then at night shifting to her reptilian form, physically shifting. And apparently people I know have said they've seen this. And then in that form, that is a more appropriate form to transmit this information. So that's one role that may be played in a physical form.
Let me bring you back to language. That the language that we use to discuss these matters is challenged. The larger realities that the hybrids, channels, and other experiencers are bringing through. Why would you define that statement a little more, if you can?
Sorry, just read that back to me, please.
The language we use to discuss these matters is challenged. The larger realities that the hybrids, channels, and other experiences are bringing through. Well, what did you mean by that?
Well, I think exactly, just pretty much all of the above. It's very difficult to find the language to even discuss this stuff, because a lot of it is outside of our direct experience. It's outside of our direct knowing. We may have glimpses of it. We may have brief experiences of it. I mean, like I and many other people have had out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and experiences of finding yourself manifested as pure consciousness. So we have some access to this. But in general, if you think about the culture we live in, it is a highly materialist culture. It's a rationalist, empiricist, Newtonian kind of reality that, and if you think about the way that plays out in our economic structures, capitalism itself, it's just about materialism. The most important thing it can possibly do is focus everybody's attention on the material, on kind of fleeting material experiences of novelty, or, I mean, watch a set of adverts. I mean, it's so much of it is based around materialist fear of aging, fear of not driving the right thing or wearing the right thing. There is such a strong kind of material focus in our culture that to try to have a debate at any kind of useful level about the metaphysical is incredibly tough. And you also have to recognize that we're still playing out all these kind of Abrahamic narratives, all of those ideas and those values, those stories. I mean, turn on the news, it is playing out continually where people are wedded to a certain set of beliefs, a certain framework, and they'll die for it and they'll kill for it. And in that kind of environment, it may be that, if you think of the Crusades, if you think of the Inquisition, and then you think of what was brought to us that actually raised our standard of living, and the kind of pleasures and the sense of security that came from the development of a materialist worldview and economy that came through the Enlightenment and the scientific revolutions.
It's John in LA, but when you mention the reptilians and the insight you now have about them with your insight from the hybrids, does what David Icke said about the Queen and other high profilers ring true to you in some way?
Well, that's a funny one, in that when I actually think it's in Meet the Hybrids, Juju said that she encountered the Queen of England astrally and basically saw her shapeshift, I believe. She said to her, "Oh, you're one of them," or something. And I think she said her eye changed or something. I can't remember the details of that story. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I am one of millions of people who have seen, these videos of Hillary Clinton and her eyes apparently shifting. And some of, like, one recent video was, I don't know. I mean, you look at that stuff and you think, well, of course it could be CGI. Of course it could. It probably is. It could be any number of things. But yeah, I mean, David and numerous other people have been bringing forward this narrative about reptilians. And when you talk to people who have encountered certain reptilians, it feels like there's more to that story. It feels like it's possible. It's one of those things. I mean, I try not to focus too much on the dark side because I think this world has far too much dark side in it. I try to focus on things that are, I think, more constructive, more useful to people than just spending our time locked in fear. I don't feel like that is where growth comes. So I don't really get too involved in it. But as I say, in conversations, even I did an interview with Robert Fullington just this week for my next book, After We Are the Disclosure. I've done 3 interviews for that book so far. And he was talking about the 3 different kinds of reptilians that he's encountered. And he said one of them seemed positive, what he would say positive, benevolent. One of them was what he thinks of as the draconians, the kind of, these big reptilians that he described as having wings, tail, head like a monitor lizard. Like, he described all of them quite differently. But so 2 out of the 3 were described as maybe not with our best interest at heart. However, in Meet the Hybrids, 2 of the hybrids are reptilian. Understand they are reptilian, Charmaine and Juju. And I just don't think you could meet sweeter, kinder, more people more dedicated to goodness and light in this world. So it's a mixed picture. I mean, you can't say, I just don't think you can generalize. People who've spent a good amount of time in the contact field, particularly those who've had multiple contacts, channels, for example, will tell you that there are many, many different varieties, versions, subspecies, species of any particular exophenotype. So say reptilians, you could have 100,000 different types. And why wouldn't you? Because if even one part of this whole subject is true, then you're looking at a galaxy, all these different dimensions, of time and space that are filled with life, filled with intelligences. And the idea that one type is going to have one set of characteristics, I mean, it just makes no sense.
Agreed. Now, we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to get some more out of you. Let me ask you this. Why have the hybrids given you a far more spiritual interpretation of this subject?
Well, I mean, it's all in the book. I mean, from the first minute, that is where they're at. That's the level they're at. What they're always talking about is frequency, energy, vibration, and making that as high as possible. I mean, this ties back into, I mean, this is just about, I mean, this is not new, right? This is absolutely traditional. I mean, if you look at Buddhism, you could say Hinduism, you could say many, many different ways of being on this planet have all been to do with refining ourselves as beings, developing empathy, developing a kind of control of our own ego. And if you look at the message from the hybrids, it's the same stuff. It just walks through it. It's like they're all walking into the same room through different doors. It's the same message. It's about love, oneness, connection. It's about the unity of all things. It's about the fact that wherever you are today, you can be in a better place tomorrow if you decide to. It's all about choice.
It's interesting, you know, for me as a Christian, I hear what you're saying, but I also understand when you talk of the reptilian, the serpent side, it warns us against deception. It warns us that it's a negativity effect. How can you address that to Christians and sort of make them overcome? You know, obviously knowledge is power, and understanding, you know, dissolves that fear base. What could you suggest to make, you know, people that are in a fear state, like you've mentioned, that, you know, some people are, we're hoping that people can get in a higher frame of mind to overcome fear and become more spiritual. But what would you say to Christians and other religious people?
I think, I mean, it's tough. You know, from childhood, I just thought, well, this is bananas. I mean, why are we being encouraged to adopt a framework from birth to say this is reality, that's it, done, there's your book, that's it, and you don't ask questions, by the way. And what really counts is faith, and the more faith you have, the more you reject. I mean, there's a preacher in Bristol absolutely bellows his head off. What's his name? Can't think of it. An African guy, I think he was a doctor. One day I had to stop him and ask him and say, well, where does all this come from? And you know, how do you come to do this? And then we got into a kind of Q&A, and everything I asked him to challenge this idea of adopting a complete framework and basically pulling up the drawbridge and saying, I'm done. I'm not ever going to do my own thinking ever again. That's it. I had to ask him about this, and every single thing I asked him, he just opened the Bible and he said, well, if you look at this passage or that passage, I said, yeah, but keep the Bible closed and engage with me. Just tell me, yeah, Pastor Francis, lovely man. And he couldn't do it. He could not physically do it. He said, I can't do it. I won't do it. It's here. Here is the information. And I said, but if you believe a word of that, surely you would. I mean, I was listening to a lecture last night by Alan Watts, and you know, he's talking about sort of comparative religion and so forth, and he was making this similar kind of point, and he was saying that there is no way that a loving God would do that to his people, to put the whole story, the only truth, the only information of any relevance to anybody's life in one book. He said there's no way a loving God would do that to his creation, because he'd basically turn their minds to toffee. I mean, and I guess from childhood, that was my sense. I thought, but I was just born with an absolute head full of questions about everything. I mean, it's impossible to do the kind of work that I do if you don't, I mean, you end up there because you're not satisfied with somebody else's narrative. And I think that the whole thing about fear and all of that, and fearing serpents and so forth, I mean, it comes down to a choice. Either you stay where you are and you say, no, I'm not willing to step outside my framework. I have too much fear of the consequences. I fear what God will do to me if I ask a question, if I try and understand this better. I don't know. Like I said, it's not my experience. I can't speak to it. I mean, I've had 2 encounters with angelic beings, and I didn't go off and get religion and hang out in churches. I mean, I hang out in churches. They're beautiful places for contemplation. The energy can be absolutely amazing. The craftsmanship. I mean, it's a really important part of our culture, and it's a thing that, I do not reject wholeheartedly, but I say it isn't for me. It isn't for me. I find it stimulating. I find it fascinating. Like everybody else, I would love to have been able to or be able to hang out with Jesus and really say, tell me from the top. I want to understand you, your role. One of the hybrids said to me, I believe Jesus was a hybrid.
Yes. I've always thought of that very same thing, because if you think about the Virgin Mary being
The Immaculate Conception, yeah.
Exactly what happens when females are taken aboard. They are either virgins or they have not had sexual intercourse for years and cannot possibly be pregnant. And then all of a sudden they find out they're pregnant. And before it comes to their second trimester, baby's gone without having a miscarriage. Yep. Anyhow, I'm glad you mentioned that. Johnny, I know you had something to say. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to carry on with what you're talking there. It's interesting because Jesus says when he returns, he's going to come through the clouds. And I've always thought of UFOs in the clouds rather than him coming through the front door of Walmart. We said earlier, he's possibly a hybrid. From a point of view of the soul, of the spirit, what we've talked about this evening is really being able to disconnect from the physical, go into maybe a higher state of mind, maybe go into a more secure spiritual area. But the Bible is all about the spiritual. It's milk for the soul, it's not for the intellect. And so, it clearly warns us that there will be not just deception, but we have to make choice, of course, that you mentioned. I think we need to give clear information when we're sort of talking openly like this so that people can hear this and understand it. One, from your part, which is obviously very close to these beings, and obviously for those who've never come into contact or even have knowledge of beings. But what we're talking about is something that's happening. It's really happening. It mentions it in the Bible, and it now mentions it in your books.
I'll tell you one interesting thing that came to mind. In part 1 of We Are the Disclosure, I interviewed Lynn Buchanan, the remote viewer. Amazing man. I just adore him. And in his chapter, he tells one of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard. And I'll just give a brief summary of it. He said that he had he'd been invited to a salon-type meeting, just himself and 3 other scientists, to basically give presentations. It was just meeting in the home of one of the scientists, and basically, have a kind of intellectual cross-fertilization, talk about their work and see, are there any kind of synergies suggested by the kinds of work that they do? Any interesting ways that they can draw on each other's work? Now, one of the scientists says to Lynn, could we take a walk, after dinner one evening? So off they go, and they take a walk, and they find a nice spot to rest up for a while, and they get to talking. Now, this scientist says that he's been doing work looking at the people at Petra in Jordan. He says the people at Petra, that civilization, were not human. He believes they were the Nephilim from the Bible. And he found, he had access to, millennia, it seems, of medical records. And he had studied the physiological differences between the Nephilim, between this civilization of Petra and regular humans. And he found about 31 characteristics, 32 characteristics, something like that. And he said that you could see through history that every once in a while, these characteristics reappear. And he said the mechanism for that, he believes, is like he was talking about, I forget the name of the guy, but the guy who basically is the father of genetics. His name won't come to me, but I believe he was cleric of some sort. Now, what he was doing was crossbreeding peas. Like he was looking at crossbreeding smooth peas and wrinkled peas. And what he found is that every so many generations, the hybrid peas would separate out again into their original forms. And he said that he feels the same happened with the people at Petra, that there was a kind of an interbreeding with humans, but every so many generations they would separate out again, and those kind of, if you want to call them Nephilim genes, would become more asserted. And he said that when that happens, about 20 to 30 years down the line, after they mature, there are huge wars that take place. Now, if you consider the hybrid situation, and I hear from people every single week who say they're just coming to understand their hybrids. So there's clearly quite a number of these people out there. I mean, who could possibly guess how many? I don't know. But it seems possible from what is being suggested by the law of biology that sooner or later down the line, like hybrids will start to separate out again into their human form on the one hand and their ET form on the other. I mean, who can say? But it seems to me that what we're accessing here is some of the most important information about the human story and the larger reality that's ever been uncovered. And clearly, it's massively disturbing to worldviews that exclude, perhaps actively exclude, the extraterrestrial component. So to me, it's no surprise that disclosure is happening this way.
I'm
that
glad
it
you
is coming
brought
from
that up
us.
because we're actually out of time. So I'm going to put two parts in one and then have another third question at the same time. The first one, and mind you, answer them after you get all three because two are related to one.
Mhm.
It's exactly related to what you said. Basically, I want to know about the top-down disclosure that so many people talk about appears to you as a fallacy and why you believe the ETs seem to be the drivers of disclosure. And right before you answer that, one yes or no question. Are you yourself a hybrid?
I don't know is the answer. I think we probably all are. If you look at the information from Michael Cremo and Klaus Donner and Jerry Wills and Rita Louise and many other people in these books and way beyond them, you will get this kind of narrative that says that humans were genetically altered in our history. If you talk to the hybrids themselves, they will tell you which races did this. The Orions is one that I remember hearing about. The mantis beings, some mantis being somewhere. So it seems like, from that perspective, humanity is a hybrid race. And if you talk about the fallacy, well, I think it's what I set out before. I think it's a red herring. I just don't see it's ever going to happen. And if it does, this phrase came to mind when thinking about all this stuff. While composing the conclusion, only a fool asks a liar for the truth. why on earth, with everything we've learned about the amount of lying that goes on in every aspect of our culture, especially our government, why on earth would people imagine they would tell us the truth? I mean, why? Why would they think that's what will happen? I mean, I talked about it at the end of We Are the Disclosure. I've put it in the introduction to part 1 and the conclusion to part 2. I've put the most recent White House statement on the matter, which deals only in absolutes. I think it was a response to one of Stephen Bassett's petitions in 2011. And it basically just said, no, there's nothing. No. Nothing ever happened, ever.
Let me say, he's not a researcher. He's just an activist.
No, sure. But, you can see where he's coming from. There are many, many people who say, listen, the fastest route to the target is to go to the top and say, just tell everyone, like you were saying earlier. I think
disclosures in your hands. That's what I was saying. That's what I always say every show.
I mean, from Stephen's point of view, and there'll be many people who share that view. That's how it will work. I mean, I was involved in political work in my former career, doing advocacy nationally and internationally on renewable energy policy. So I was involved with those mechanics, the mechanisms of decision making. And you can see that absolutely everyone everywhere, it's just basically a kind of war of agendas. And with something like this, if everything people say is true about what this offers us, on so many levels, this would radically change it's not just technological, but it's the expansion of our consciousness. I mean, right now, we are stuck in a holding pattern. We're like a plane that just can't take off. We're stuck, unable to make progress because it's like people aren't being given permission to acknowledge the reality of this. I believe everybody knows that we're not alone. I believe everybody knows that there are these other intelligences that have been interacting here for millennia.
Millennia, exactly, or millions of years, as some other people have put it.
Sure.
Let me say this. It's been an awesome conversation with you. I can't wait to get your other books. We could do this again. Everybody out there listening, remember, you will get to hear the show after it plays here on our Coast to Coast PM radio network. It's going to go on to Late Night in the Midlands, PSN, and in the United Kingdom, D Program Radio Network. Not to mention, it's available on Shoutcast, iTunes, TuneIn.com, and if you're lucky, then you're listening to it in FM or AM if you're in the Midwest or East Coast of the United States of America. I want to give you, Miguel, a final thought. One more thing, if you'd like to say, if you have one statement you'd like to say to the world, what would you say to them all?
I think that if I've learned anything at all in this field, it's that to make progress in it, you cannot just open the mind. I believe you have to open your heart too. I believe only by doing both can you truly make progress.
Very well said. Very well said. And of course, everybody, you've been listening to the one and only Dr. J Radio Live. Truly international syndicated show talking about information that you are not going to see on BBC, Fox News, or CNN, or anything like that. We are bringing you alternative media straight from the horse's mouth. And if you want to go to any of our social media sites, it's all under the same name of the show, Dr. J Radio Live. Everything from Facebook to where we archive our shows on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, and everything under the sun is under DRJ Radio Live. I must thank our guest, Miguel, for joining us tonight, and of course, my sleuth of team members joining us. And don't forget, the most important people are you, the listener. It's up to you to take disclosure, take the bull by the horns and do something with it. Use your skills and spread the knowledge, because that is how we are going to achieve it, just like Miguel said. So pay attention and make sure you check out his websites. Miguel, one more time, what are they?
We are thedisclosure.com and meetthehybrids.wordpress.com.
And absolutely, everybody, you will see those, of course, under his bio. Just go ahead and see them at those links, hot links, as well as when this is archived on youtube.com/what do you think? DRJ Radio Live. That's right. And of course, go on the books and videos tab on the website, drjradiolive.com, and click on Miguel's name, and it'll take you to his Amazon page, which will showcase all 3 of his books. With that being said, this is Dr. J, and I am officially signing off for our show.
I hope you enjoyed it, folks. Join us tomorrow night. This is Dr. J, and now I am signing off live.